session number 70. The panel topic of discussion is food, civic identity formation, and black neighborhoods. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Pearlie M. Johnson. I am from the University of Louisville, where I teach the survey of African and African American art. I am so excited to be teaching the visual arts. I've gone to a number of sessions, and I was telling the young ladies that I go to another organization called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, and not a whole lot of people teach the visual arts. It is so important in Africana studies. I will be giving a paper myself tomorrow afternoon at 2, I think, in the room next door. So before I go on, I just wanted to introduce myself. Let me introduce the panel. It's not all right. Christina Foster, on the far left, will be speaking. She's coming to us from Ihote Academy, and the title of her topic is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Food, Sovereignty, and Black America. And our next speaker is Joliet Anderson from Purdue University. Was that a joint appointed person?
No. It's a typo.
Okay. And the title of her presentation today is In Goldleana's Hand, How a Black Space Created Black Cultural and Civic Identity in the Hollywood Neighborhood of Shreveport, Louisiana. Well, let's give our participants a hand, and we look forward to hearing their presentation. And you can begin, you can start. Well, yes, please use the podium. I'm going to sit down here so that I will discreetly hold up the time. Yes, hold on a minute, let me get my phone.
Oops.
And since we're gonna just go 20 minutes.
Thank you. You ready, little mama? Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm honored to be on the panel with you, sister, and brothers and sisters in the audience. Thank you for having me. As she mentioned, the title of my presentation is called In Goldleana's Hand, How a Black Space Created Black Cultural and Civic Identity in the Hollywood Neighborhood of Shreveport, Louisiana, which is my birthplace. So basically, what is my point here? I deal with race, space, and place in my research. Race, in the context of my research, is used to describe normally what we are, and Black culture is used to describe who we are and what we do, what we have done, what we continue to do as we exist on what I am calling a Black cultural continuum. It is not acceptable or appropriate to look at Black people just in one particular space and time. We have to look at our existence generationally before we can actually begin to articulate and understand ourselves as individuals and as a group, and also for those of us who are non-Black to look at us and begin to understand who we are if they are so inclined to do so. There are 3 positions that I look at with, as I said earlier, with the Black cultural continuum as it exists under an umbrella of race, place, and space. As far as race is concerned, I define a trajectory of terms or racial identifiers used in the United States for we who are commonly called African American in this time. I offer a forthcoming term that will come after African American eventually, and that term will encompass what I call a global Black identity. Some of us use the term African diaspora or diaspora or global Blackness. But where are those spaces where we can come from different parts of the world, different geographical locations, and identify ourselves as Black people? the overall theme of my research, this is just one chapter on my grandmother, but I really talk about the Antonio Zamora years of the Black Cultural Center at Purdue University and what Mr. Zamora was trying to do when Black people came to predominantly white institutions of higher learning. And the Black Cultural Center has actually been at Purdue University since 1969. It is still there on the campus of the university even today, and is now housed in a $3 million facility that is patterned after a West African village in its architectural elements. It is also filled with a lot of art, and they now have, they started 4 performing arts ensembles: the Johari Dance Troupe, the New Directional Players, the Haraka Writers, and the Black Voices of Inspiration. The most recent addition to the Black Cultural Center of Performing Arts Ensembles is actually the Gordon Parks Visual and Fine Arts Ensemble. So they deal with photography and they do campaigns around town. And my daughter and I just posed for their Black Love series. So she got to do a professional photo shoot with students who are learning about Black photography and photographing Black people, right? So when we look at race, I was intending after the recent election to really say, okay, we are really going to have to define ourselves in global context. Like, who are these Black people in America, right? Whether your history goes back to the early 1800s, like I can trace mine to, or whether you're a recent immigrant, what does it mean to be Black and occupying and living in this space this geographical space that we call the United States of America? So there's your race and your space. And what is my place in this space, right? So place is something that exists inside of a space. So my goal is to basically figure out, where have these Black spaces been? Where are they? Where have they been? What's happening to them now? And the people that existed there. What was the culture? How did people live their day-to-day lives, and what did they value? And how did that affect me? And how did it affect you? Okay? So once again, the trajectory that I look at begins with enslaved persons, captives, and then we move from captives to, African, let me back up. African, then we move to captive, then we move to enslaved persons and free persons of color, and then we move from that to colored, then to Negro, then Afro-American, then Black, and now African American. And I'm projecting that we're going to be looking at something about global Blackness or African diaspora identity. But in order for us to get to a global acceptance of what it means to be Black, because some of us shy away from the African identity, we're going to have to really wrestle with the pain associated with what it means to be Black in the land of our birth, or in the land that we call home, right? Or we identify with as home. So that is the trajectory that I examine, and I'm looking at second Reconstruction time period, and I'm also up to the Reagan years, right? And place. In dealing with space, I've talked about space as being this general kind of vibe, and then one finding one's place inside of space. But that doesn't always go in that order. Sometimes it's place and space, sometimes it's space and place, and they kind of do an interchanging kind of thing, depending on what you're actually researching and what you're trying to find out. What exactly is my research about? Black people. And what I mean by that is I actually look at life experiences as text, okay? If you can hang on with me for just a second, I'll try to explain. We usually approach a piece of literature or a book or academic book with looking at the table of contents, looking at the author's background, when the book was published. We looked at all these different things to try to position or put that in a particular place in our research and our scholarship. I'm saying that I have 7 markers of life experiences that have been the text for me, that pushes me and compels me and propels me to continue to do the work that I do with and for Black people, all right? So one of the things that I'm gonna outline quickly these 7 things. Number 1, growing up on Ledbetter Street in Shreveport, Louisiana, I was deprived of what one calls formal Black cultural education, meaning the education that we get when we go sit inside of the classroom. We call that the formal education. And I received a very fulfilling, formative Black cultural education because of my parents, both of whom were graduates of historically Black colleges and university. My dad from Southern University in Baton Rouge and my mom from Wiley College in Marshall, Texas. So he was born in 37, she was born in 1940, right there in the Jim Crow years. But the interesting thing about this continuum of genealogy, my dad's father was 66 years old when he was born. That means that my grandfather, not my great or my great-great, my grandfather was born in 1870. That's 5 years after the Civil War ended. So when we talk about, oh, that time was so long ago, no, I'm 48, it was my grandfather, because he was one of those older people that still was having children. And my dad was the fifth of 8, all right? So he was still having children up until the early 1940s, right? So when we look at that, just my genealogy, and we say, well, how did these people move from enslavement or being free, and how did we move through the emancipation? What was the day-to-day struggles like? And I absolutely fell in love with Frances E.W. Harper, and I think I just saw my professor walk in. But in the way that she tells stories in 19th century American Lit, when I had Dr. Patton's class, the way she broke down the diversity of how Black people were thinking on different levels, okay? So this is going to make a circle real quick. Number 2, when I attended Louisiana Tech University and Grambling State University as a student, I was not tuned in to the culture that I was actually living at that time. So I had my first master's by the time I was 24 years old. By the time I look back 20 years and get my second master's from Purdue at age 44, I realized that there were 2 unique cultures just 6 miles up the road from each other. And it had a lot more to do with the history of the country and citizenship and what we had access or denial to than it had to do, which is all embodied in the color of the skin or embodied in race. The third thing, as an artist and a poet, I was an intern at New Stage Theater in Jackson, Mississippi. So I migrated from Louisiana to Mississippi and found similarities but differences in the cultures of the Deep South, but most things were common. Black people in land ownership, those who stayed and didn't leave, those who left and came back as far as the Great Migration is concerned. All of this exists on this through line of what I call a cultural continuum, all right? Working for the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development in 1997 with the Pathways to Freedom that worked with young people, helping them retrace certain spots on the Underground Railroad by bus. That trip ended very tragically when we were in a bus accident, and that whole symbolism of that was also a text in my life, all right? And working with the Young People's Project with Omo Taba and Maisha Moses at Brinkley Middle School in Jackson, Mississippi, and then eventually working for their father, Bob Moses, who was the worker during SNCC and Freedom Summer in Mississippi. And that also is another text that exists that pushes me to do this kind of work and to recognize these kinds of connections, which is what American Studies does for us. It helps us connect those dots. Moses was known for SNCC, but one thing that Dr. Moses did for me was he articulated a pain to me one time in just a casual conversation. And there's no specific date or time, it's just that I worked for him, and in the context of working for him, one day I asked him some kind of questions about Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker. And he was talking to me and he said something, and I'm paraphrasing, he said that, you know, when we deal with each other as Black folk, we have to have some kind of ethics. We have to have some kind of accountability and responsibility to each other and for each other, because we've all been had real bad, all right? What he meant by that, how I interpret that is, we have all been treated extremely bad, and that pain has been passed down from generation to generation to generation on that cultural continuum. And if we who are conscious of the fact that we have had that pain don't find ways to actually do something to contribute to the healing of that pain, or getting folks to acknowledge that pain, then it's only gonna continue for my daughter and whoever comes after her. So we have to find a point where we stop now. With this recent election, I thought we were moving toward a global identity, but it looks like we are having to Sankofa, right? It looks like we're gonna have to go back and get some things corrected before we can actually move forward. We're gonna go back and have to define and redefine, right, who we are, and not only teach ourselves, but also teach other people who think they know who we are, right? And I know I have a lot of attitude, but y'all bear with me, all right? So being able to, the sixth thing is being able to work at the Purdue Black Cultural Center on campus. And I should publicly actually thank the person that hired me, because it was a truly beneficial text in my life, right? Working in higher education, working as an administrator on behalf of Black students, a Black institution that tries to reach all students at a predominantly white university, taught me a whole lot. So I do thank Mrs. Nay Thomas for that. But I also, in the interest of full disclosure, because I'm working on IRB right now, the Internal Review Board stuff right now, it would be dishonest of me not to mention also that Mrs. Thomas also fired me from my job. And so my research has to stop at the point that she began working for the Black Cultural Center. Anything else would be unethical, because the question is always going to be there, are you doing this research to get back at the person who fired you? So I have to take the responsibility of acknowledging that pain, getting through that, and doing what I need to do on behalf of Black people and Black institutions. So I need to let that be known publicly and let that be stated. And the seventh and last thing that is a text in my life that connects to this continuum is the work that I did in London, early 2000s. I simply thought that being Black meant that you were immune from saying and assuming silly things about Black people. It doesn't work that way, okay? I found out, because I found that I must have assumed that Black people in Britain were above certain things. They didn't have to deal with things that we deal with as Black Americans, this geographical space and these boundaries. But I was doing a workshop that I designed, my curriculum I created called Deciphers. And it helps young people open up dialogue and discussion about race. It starts with an equation, x plus y to the fifth equals self. And so you began to ask yourself questions about yourself individually. And then I put the young people in groups. And Sister Mari in London and Sister Narai, they brought me to Oxford Middle School to work with these young people. And one group was the young girls right here, and another group was the young boys. Now, I walked over to the girls, and the girls had put on their big, chart paper, mixed race mysteries. That was going to be the name for their group. And I went, okay. Because it's an open conversation a lot in the UK. But in the Deep South, where I'm from, if you see a brother with a white woman, it's issues. You got some issues. You got to straighten your face. You got to act right? And that's something I had to get through. But I wasn't thinking about the children and their need to know. So I had to get rid of some stuff. And then I went over to the young boys, and they were of African and Caribbean descent. And when I looked down on their paper, I went, oh, that's your group name? And it was like, yeah. I said, why is this your group name? Because that's who we are. That's who we are. And I said, okay, I can't deal with this. Just give me a second. So then the parents and the teachers start coming over, looking like, is everything okay? What's wrong? And I'm saying, okay, let's just deal with this. They wrote NWA as their group name. And I was shocked. I was like, how do you even know what's going on in Compton? NWA, niggas with attitude. And I said, why would you name your group that? As a group of young Black boys, I was puzzled. And they said, because that's who we are. That's how we feel. That's who we are. And at that point, a whole wall just shattered. Because the same things that are going on in the schools in Mississippi that I'm working in was going on in the schools in Oxford, England, with Black students. What is going on in society, in the culture of the UK, that pushes you and compels you to identify yourself as that? And what is the music saying to you that pushes and compels you to identify with that word, whether you know the historical context of it or not? What is that? That is the culture. There is something in there. So I brought all of this energy, these particular 7 texts of my life, and I had to go and examine myself the same way I challenge students to examine themselves. When I worked in prisons with young people in San Francisco, I had to make sure that I had a counselor after that. Not for me, but to be in the space while the workshops were going on, because they have policies and guidelines in prisons, and you cannot say certain things in your poems in prison because they read all of your stuff. And one young girl, I did a poem by Sonia Sanchez, wrote it on the board, we dissected it, deciphered it, discussed it, and she had some stuff to come up out of her that got her in trouble because of the workshop, right? So there's something on that continuum that keeps branching off. Our kids who are in prison, our kids who are in other parts of the world, our kids who are on that Underground Railroad tour and in that bus accident. All of these things that have been going on with me trying to reach the youth, all of that was connected to Black culture. And what's the hidden curriculum in that, or the hidden information in that is, it's all connected to being a citizen of a space or a place. So when my grandmother passed in 1986, I had no idea that she could even read or write very well until my mother passed away in 2013. And I brought all of my grandmother's belongings and my mother's belongings with me to West Lafayette, Indiana. And as I was going through them, I found a journal. And I had images of the journal, but we don't have the technology for me to show you. I scanned the journal, and she wrote the names of people that weren't related to us in the days they were born. I questioned why. She wrote down a whole lot of information about, I bought a box of nails today. I talked to Mr. Brown about doing my pipes. What happened was my grandmother looks like she was assisting people who were midwives. We didn't have doctors coming out on a horse and carriage to deliver babies. We had Black women in the rural areas of Louisiana delivering babies. Her house burned down, and she wrote about that. They moved to the city of Shreveport, and they had been on that street. My mother was 9 years old when she moved on Ledbetter Street, and she was 72 years old when she died, still living on Ledbetter Street. We are not documenting those kinds of experiences during that particular time. These kinds of neighborhoods where people moved from rural areas and they landed on the street and they worked at the chair factory and the lumber yard and the steel mill and the Martin Thiaco ammunition plant, or they did child care. All of those things are a part of the continuum of our culture and who we are. And they shape and mold our identity racially. We identify with place. We identify based on space. So right now, I'm looking and searching for Black spaces. And Black spaces are not spaces that are solid and exist in one location, such as the Purdue Black Cultural Center. Those spaces are spaces we create. So when I went to the NAIGU African Storytelling Festival in the UK last year, after not being there for almost 20 years, when I went to that conference and went to that storytelling festival, it was a space that was created strictly for Black people to come so that their children can run around and do what they need and have fun out of the city. It was vegan, it was all kinds of things, but there were theater games, there was the arts, there was fire, there were all kinds of things that happened in the creation of this space for Black thought, for Black history, for Black culture to just happen, right? For it to just happen. So if we don't create those spaces, no one is going to create them for us, right? So I'm gonna close because I heard your thing go off, right? So one of the things that I want to say is that our civic identity, it's a space. This is my grandmother, Goldleana. And I did the African ancestry DNA test, and it says that some woman from Cameroon ended up over here so that I could be here today. I have no clue. This was her handwriting on the journal, just a copy of the scan that I want to show you. And this is where she listed when she took my uncle and my mom and my aunt out to chop cotton, not pick cotton, but chop cotton. Even though they lived in the city, they would go out to the rural areas because those plantations still existed in the 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And people would go out and chop cotton to earn a little bit of money, extra money, okay? So if you don't know the difference between picking and chopping, you're not gonna understand the culture. And this is a picture of Antonio Zamora, the old Black Cultural Center, and the modern, the cultural center that's there today. So chapter 4 is about Mr. Zamora. Chapter 1 is about my grandmother Goldleana and all of the documents and obituaries that Black women collected and saved in photo albums and Bibles. I have elders in my community trying to give me all of their stuff, and I have nowhere to put it. And they're leaving it for me actually in their will because they want these stories told. So, our culture exists. It's there. We have to pull it from documents and just write about what we see and connect the dots. That is a part of who we are, and I feel like it's my job and my obligation to look at life as text and to move us forward into our future identities. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Would you like for me to pass those around?